Right. So basically, when we start with uh, macroeconomics, हमारा जो discussion start होता है macroeconomics का, that has to do with obviously the overall country and how the country is performing, and उसकी हम report card बनाते हैं basically, GDP, inflation, economic growth rates, um, unemployment, and all of that, right? So it's sort of like just to have an assessment ke how the government is performing, how the country is doing, what is the future like, and so on and so forth, right? अब उसी के अंदर जो पहली चीज हमारे पास आती है, वी वांट टू हैव अ डिस्कशन ऑन एक इकोनॉमी के अंदर जीडीपी क्या होती है. नाउ जीडीपी वी हैव गॉन थ्रू in various ways. कि जीडीपी जो होती है वो टोटल, in my opinion, I think the best one you could write is that it's the total value of goods and services produced in a country, right? Produced in a country. अब ऑब्वियसली जो भी चीज मुल्क में बन रही है, पाकिस्तान के अंदर प्रोड्यूस हो रही है, it's definitely not all Pakistani resource or the money. Sometimes foreigners set up multinationals in Pakistan and they produce goods and services in Pakistan. तो वो पाकिस्तान की जीडीपी में इंक्लूडेड होती है. Similarly, there are a lot of Pakistanis who go abroad and they work in Qatar, UAE, Qatar, and Saudi Arabia, and all these places, and then they send incomes to Pakistan. Now, that's not part of Pakistani GDP because that's in Saudi Arabia. वो उनकी GDP का हिस्सा होता है. So what we want to do is, if we want to find out कि we want to measure how much value of goods and services has been produced by Pakistanis and Pakistani resources, irrespective of कि वो पाकिस्तान में प्रोड्यूस कर रहे हैं या फॉरेन कंट्री में प्रोड्यूस कर रहे हैं. So we want to factor that information in. तो उसके लिए obviously we don't rely on GDP, we rely on something else which is called GNI. GNI, basically what it does is you take the value of all the goods and services produced in the country, and then you add all the incomes that you have as a Pakistani you've earned in other countries. Like, for example, if a Pakistani invests in Google shares and the Google pays dividend on it, which is an income, तो फिर हम उसको पाकिस्तानी जीडीपी के अंदर ऐड कर देंगे. इसको हम बेसिकली कहते हैं इनकम फ्रॉम अब्रॉड. ठीक है, but then we know that foreigners invest in Pakistan also, so we now need to pay them the money. So that's not Pakistani resource, so that needs to go back out. तो इसको हम कहते हैं property incomes, net property incomes from abroad. कहीं कहीं जगह के ऊपर ये net primary income भी लिखा होता है. Means the same thing, anything which is being earned abroad minus anything which has to be paid abroad. इसमें interest payments भी आ जाती है, इसमें dividends भी आ जाते हैं, इसमें various kinds of profits भी आ सकते हैं, इसके अंदर remittances भी आ सकती हैं, right? So all sorts. Like for example, when I change check papers for Cambridge, they pay me. तो वो वहां से जब remittance notice आता है, तो that is included in our GNI because the resource was Pakistani, बेशक वो foreign soil पे क्यों ना हुआ हो. Right? So ये हमारा दूसरा measure होता है GNI. Government do take this out also. And the last one is, you know how एक factory जब operate करती है तो it produces the value of goods and services. Let's say it's producing like 1 million rupees worth of goods and services. But we also know that every year when those machines are operating, those machines are getting used up, and after like 5 years, 10 years, those machines are going to get maybe obsolete or completely get worn out. So you might have to replace those. तो उसी तरह से पूरी कंट्री के जो इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर होता है, that infrastructure is also getting um old and used up. So obviously, if it gets used up, then it's not producing anything for you. तो हम क्या करते हैं उसको measure करने के लिए we take out something called NNI, Net National Income. Basically, you take the GNI, which you've just calculated, sorry, GNI, not GNP. They don't call it GNP anymore. Gross national income, which we've just calculated above, and you subtract from that gross something called depreciation or capital consumption. They both mean the same thing, which is basically assets getting used up. Concept क्या है इसके पीछे? The concept is simple. So we're talking about capital, right? Capital investments, machines, things like that. So let's suppose we have a data that this year there has been about 25 new machines that have been installed. So obviously हमें पता है new machines mean more output, right? Uh, so GDP is going to go up or GNI is going to go up as a result of that. But over the year, it's quite possible that a few machines now needs replacement, which is depreciation. So let's say five machines needs depreciation. तो actually जो net या new investments हुई है, that's actually 20. And the impact on your GDP will be just of 20 machines worth of output, right? So इसी वजह से we say NNI is even a better measure of an economic output because it also factors in the using up of the resources and net it with the new. अब इस पर्टिकुलर चीज के ऊपर अभी तक कोई क्वेश्चन नहीं आया है सिंस 2023 ऑनवर्ड्स इस पे क्या क्वेश्चंस बन सकते हैं आई थिंक अभी तो the information that we've just given कि जीडीपी क्या होता है जीएनआई क्या होता है और एनएनआई क्या होता है इस पे सिंपल सा क्वेश्चन ये बन सकता है कि यू हैव टू एक्सप्लेन द डिफरेंसेस ओके or explain something that to what extent GNI number is equals to GDP, or is it always that GNI number is greater than GDP ka number? Some sort of comparison. So obviously, even if you have to do a comparison, first thing you need to know is their respective formulas. GNI or NNI ka I have given you the formulas. These are the formulas. Obviously, and then uski jo value hai, that will depend on these formulas. What we haven't talked about is how to measure GDP. Now, this is something that you guys do in O level, right? इसके ऊपर MCQ ही आ सकता है मेरी नजर में तो लेकिन I would not rule out a situation where they might give you a question that you might need to explain how GDP is measured or uh, explain how GDP is measured. Yeah, बस simple ऐसा 3 मार्क का ये आ सकता है. And then and consider um, is measuring GDP a valuable exercise or something along that line? Is it worth measuring this number? तो पहली बात, first part of what I've said, how do you measure GDP? First thing we need to know is GDP is gross domestic product. It is the total value of goods and services produced in the country. There are three methods to calculate GDP. You have something called the income method. Income method may all you have to do is take the factors of production, which ones? Land, labor, capital, and enterprise, and basically add all their rewards, जो हम micro में कर चुके हैं. Basically, you add all the rents that has been generated in the economy, all the wages and salaries that have been paid, all sorts of interest payments that have been made, and all kinds of profits that have been made. You add them all up, and you get yourself the GDP ka number. That's a simple one. Okay. Add all the rewards of the factors of production used. The second method that we have is called expenditure method. Now, this one is honestly economics के अंदर the most important method. Government uses it, and in fact तुम्हारा AS and A2 के अंदर इसके ऊपर पूरे पूरे मॉडल्स हैं. अभी भी जो हम बात करेंगे ज्यादातर इसी मॉडल के ऊपर होंगी. Basically, what we're saying in this is aggregate expenditure, which means total expenditure in the economy. Whatever is produced in the country, who is buying all of those goods? Okay, so if you're producing Toyota Corollas, then who is buying Toyota Corollas? So we say consumers are buying it, businesses are buying, governments are buying, foreigners are buying. X minus M, we're subtracting M because it's not Pakistani good. GDP is supposed to be everything produced in Pakistan, so we subtract M from it. So consumers buy the stuff, business do investments in goods and services, government buys it, and export import. You add them up, you get yourself the same number जो income method में आता है. The third method that we have is called output method. तो एक एक mark के लिए I think these are reasonable explanations for knowledge and understanding. Output method के अंदर basically what we do is we take the current price of the good and we multiply it with the quantity produced. And we do that for all the goods and services produced in the country, and we sum it up. To explain, we have quite a lot of sectors in the economy. We have automobile, we have primary के अंदर agriculture, fishing, forestry, construction, mining, cement, steel. I think I've said automotive, banking, insurance, communications. There are all sorts of companies. All you have to do is go to the automobile sector and ask each company, like you go to Toyota and you ask them, okay, how many Corollas did you produce and at what price did you sell it? And then you say, for all the variants, do that, for all the models, do that, and give us that one big number, what you've made, the revenue. Okay. The same you would do for Honda, Kia, Hyundai, everyone, and you're going to total that and you get yourself automobile ka number. So, इस तरह से you do that for every sector in the economy, and then you get yourself a very large number. I think Pakistan mein you'll get a number more than like 380, 390 billion US dollars worth. And in US and places, you'll get a big number close to like some trillions of dollars, right? तो ये हमारे तीन methods होते हैं, output, income, and expenditure method. Um, at the same time, why do we measure GDP? Like, who looks into that? तो हम we need to realize that, in fact, it's not only about GDP, but it's about all the macroeconomic indicators that we use. Take every single economic indicator that we use. तो इन्फ्लेशन होता है, अनएम्प्लॉयमेंट होती है, इधर ये वाला हो गया, हमारे पास पूरे पूरे लेबर फोर्स, बैलेंस ऑफ पेमेंट, यू नो different industry wise, what is happening. So we have quite a lot of data available. Who is using these data? तो हमें कुछ क्या कहेंगे इनको? Let's call them stakeholders. Every economy have stakeholders. It's quite possible that firms looks at this data to see where the economy is going. Governments looks at these data to see what type of policies we should be implementing. Investors of all sorts, whether it's like investor in stock exchange or it's an investor abroad, they take a look at these numbers. Then you have, all sorts of foreign partners in terms of it could be IMF, it could be World Bank, it can be a company which buy goods and services from us or we from them. They're interested. Then local economy के अंदर labor unions and labor would be interested in looking at these numbers just to see how the country is doing and where it's going. Remember, micro में हम starting में बात करते हैं, economics is more about positive statements than normative. We know that we cannot save ourselves from normative statements, which are opinions. Every economist have opinions, but we tend to rely more on our facts and figures. This is what we've done. This is the rate. This is how it has impacted. This is the national minimum wage. So everything is facts and figures because we have to make a lot of economic future related decisions. So that's why जीडीपी का accurate होना एक बहुत important और जरूरी चीज है. ठीक है. अब just with this, I'll send you the notes and all, and you can take a look at this. Lectures are already there, much more details के अंदर. I'm just skimming through it. अब जो हमारा इससे आगे एक एक्सटेंडेड बार डिस्कशन जाती है वो कुछ ये वाली है. आई थिंक दिस वन वुड बी अ गुड क्वेश्चन ऑल्सो. ये जब A2 में ये चैप्टर होता था तो दे यूज्ड टू बी क्वेश्चंस ऑन दिस. You know how we've calculated GDP, GNI, and NNI? Sometimes, and ये गवर्नमेंट के डेटाज में भी होता है, sometimes the GDP is calculated in market price, but sometimes GDP can also be calculated in something called the basic price. इसको आप basic price भी कह सकते हो, factor cost भी कह सकते हो. I've seen factor cost also. A2s में तो हम factor cost कहा कहते थे. Books के अंदर इसको basic price, factor cost, all sorts. But just remember, there are only two things. One is market price, and the other one can be basic prices. What is the idea? The thing is, when we are calculating GDP, so let me repeat. You see, हमने एक total output method use किया था, और total output method में what we did was we took the current price of Toyota Corolla at which it's got sold in the market, and we multiplied it with the number of Corollas that were produced. So that gave us a total value of Toyota Corollas being produced in the country. Similarly, we do this for every single thing that is produced in Pakistan. We're talking about definitely near 1,000 things, or maybe more. 1,000 types of things. In fact, लाखों में होगी अगर आप उनकी different variants को और models को भी include कर लें. So this is not just limited to cars, but every single thing. You take the current price, multiply with the quantity produced, and you get yourself one big number. Now, the price that people pay is considered the market price. अब इसको हम explain ऐसे करते हैं. I open a restaurant and I asked my chef कि ठीक है आप एक पास्ता की डिश बनाते हैं कितने की सेल कर सकते हैं. So he says based on all the expenses that I have to incur, I can sell it for 1,000 rupees. Okay. But then, obviously, when I'm selling it to the customer, I'm not going to sell it for 1,000. And by the way, this 1,000 also has my profit included. Matlab, the chef is saying, with my profit, I am willing and able to sell it for 1,000 rupees. But to the customer, I'm going to add tax on it. Okay? So this 1,000 rupee was actually the factor cost, the basic price, the basic factor price. How much raw material went in it and what was the price of all everything. फिर उसमें जब मैंने tax ऐड किया तो I got myself a market price. So let's say if the tax is like 17%, then I'm selling this product for 1,170. That's my market price. But imagine if I'm selling rice or let's say petrol and the extraction and buying and factor cost के ऊपर the petrol costs somewhere around 200 rupees per liter. And then the government steps in and says, don't worry, petrol is essential, it's important, we'll give you subsidy on it. We'll give you 50 rupees का subsidy on it. ठीक है? तो मेरी फैक्टर कॉस्ट में से जब मैं सब्सिडी माइनस करूंगा तो what will happen to my market price? Well, now I can sell this for 150. So what can we conclude about market price and factor price? Normally, countries के अंदर जो जीडीपी कैलकुलेट होती है ना, वो मार्केट प्राइस पे कैलकुलेट होती है, which includes taxation and subsidies का impact. So if the question asks you that we would like you to calculate GDP at factor cost, and they've given you market price. In fact, if they don't tell you anything, and it's just like a number, 390 billion rupees, so that means for nominal. They always give you nominal. If they're giving you factor cost, they'll mention it specifically. So right now they want you to calculate GDP at factor cost. उसकी actual बनाने की cost क्या है in terms of land, labor, capital, enterprise. So what we say is, okay, take the GDP at market price. This market price already has tax in it. That's why GDP just went up, minus the tax. Subtract the tax का effect so that the GDP comes down. वो जो tax की वजह से price बढ़ गई थी, let's bring it down to its actual thing. And subsidy की वजह से जो GDP गिर गई थी because it made things cheaper, let's add that impact again. इसको मैं कैसे याद करता हूं? इफ यू रिमेंबर माइक्रो के अंदर हमने जब डिमांड एंड सप्लाई बनाते थे तो वी यूज्ड टू लुक एट द इम्पैक्ट्स ऑफ टैक्सेस एंड सब्सिडी. रिमेंबर, जब सबसे आप टैक्स लगाते हैं तो सप्लाई का शिफ्ट टू द लेफ्ट एंड द प्राइसेस गो अप. So when the prices goes up, your GDP number goes up because market price के अंदर tax लगा हुआ है. तो उसको actual cost पे ले जाने के लिए you have to subtract this indirect taxes from it. ठीक है? And similarly, if they've given you the factor cost and they want you to calculate the market price, you know factor cost में तो अभी taxation लगा ही नहीं है. So you add indirect taxes to it and you subtract the subsidy, and basically you get yourself the GDP at market prices. तो ये इस तरीके से, क्योंकि रिमेंबर सब्सिडी इज सपोज टू मेक थिंग्स चीपर, तो जो उसकी एक्चुअल कॉस्ट आई है बनाने की उसमें से सब्सिडी सब्ट्रैक्ट करेंगे एंड दैट विल गिव यू जीडीपी एट मार्केट प्राइस. तो ये इस तरीके से हमारा जो है ये एक एलिमेंट है. अब अगेन वी डोंट नो कि ये किस तरीके से एसेज में आ सकता है, but I would, if I had to give a question, I could ask something like, um, explain the difference between GDP at factor cost and GDP at market price. Or I can even say something like, um, tell me the difference between GDP at market price and NNI at factor cost. NNI at factor cost. We can even do that. So अब there is a lot of information that will go into. So let me just conclude this. I'm saying, what is the difference between GDP at market price and NNI at factor cost? So my length of explanation would be, कि जब जीडीपी एट मार्केट प्राइस होती है तो दिस इज द टोटल वैल्यू ऑफ गुड्स एंड सर्विसेज प्रोड्यूस्ड इन द कंट्री एट द करंट प्राइसेस। ओके। पहले जीडीपी को हम जीडीपी एट फैक्टर कॉस्ट पे कन्वर्ट कर लेते हैं। ओके। हाउ डू यू डू दैट? यू टेक द जीडीपी एट मार्केट प्राइस। ये मार्केट प्राइस है तो इसमें टैक्स लगा हुआ है। यू सब्ट्रैक्ट इनडायरेक्ट टैक्स फ्रॉम इट एंड यू एड सब्सिडी, खासतौर पे एमसीक्यूज में इफ इट इज गिवन। नाउ वी हैव जीडीपी एट फैक्टर कॉस्ट। अब इस जीडीपी एट फैक्टर कॉस्ट को कन्वर्ट कर लेते हैं, इसमें से नेट प्रॉपर्टी इनकम्स ऐड करके इसको जीएनआई एट फैक्टर कॉस्ट में, and then we'll take this GNI at factor cost and you subtract depreciation from it and you get yourself NNI at factor cost. ये आपका पूरा procedure है इसके पीछे. It's the same steps which I've just talked about and I've just repeated them. ठीक हो गया? तो this is like the first particular section जो नेशनल इनकम स्टेटिस्टिक्स का, जिससे मैक्रो इकोनॉमिक्स स्टार्ट होता है। ओके।
And this come in essays.
सो फार इट हैजंट, बट ऑफ कोर्स व्हाई नॉट? क्यों नहीं आ सकता? दे कैन आस्क यू, लाइक आई सेड, दे कैन आस्क यू हाउ यू कैन एक्सप्लेन हाउ यू कैन मेजर जीडीपी and discuss to what extent it is important, या discuss to what extent it is important to have an accurate GDP number. ये क्वेश्चन बन सकता है बिल्कुल। You can have a question, explain the difference between GDP at market price and factor cost, and and consider to what extent it can be used in the economy, something along those lines. So of course, क्यों नहीं आ सकता? They can make questions. They're making questions, all sorts of questions. At least 3 mark, 8 marker के 3 mark के अंदर they can definitely ask you this. तो वो बन सकता है, बिल्कुल बन सकता है. In fact, just they have in the past given questions on, explain the difference between एवरेज टैक्स रेट एंड मार्जिनल टैक्स रेट. ये अभी आया है, मेरा ख्याल है जून के अंदर आया है या लास्ट ईयर आया है ये क्वेश्चन. और 3 mark. Obviously, the later part was about reasons for taxation, that why should the government tax people and all. That was the analysis wala part. But 3 mark ke liye, they can pick on these small things and they can ask you a question on that. ठीक है? Okay. Now, my interest is circular flow of income. So far, circular flow of income के ऊपर 3 questions तो I know के आए हैं. There might be another one I might have missed out on, but 3 questions तो definitely आए हैं इसके ऊपर. Um, circular flow of income एक दफा बनाने को आया था. It was a simple सा question and they said, with the help of the circular flow of income, uh, or was it something like draw the circular flow of income, and how equilibrium is determined in an open economy or things like that. So let me just give you a brief on that, and then usi information se I'll pick all sorts of questions. Now, बैम्फर्ड की बुक के अंदर जो सर्कुलर फ्लो ऑफ इनकम बनाया है वो काफी एक्सटेंसिव बनाया है. इनफैक्ट आई वुड लाइक टू शो जो बनाया है, बिकॉज अ लॉट ऑफ किड्स ग्लोबली, बिकॉज चेकिंग करते हुए वी सॉ दोज डायग्राम्स एंड वी वर अमेज्ड दैट बच्चों ने ये याद भी किए थे. आई हैव नेवर टॉट माय किड्स कि आप इस तरीके से उसको याद करें, because it's irrelevant. The required is a very small aspect of the whole circular flow of income. So let me just upload that. Might take a minute. But एक सर्कुलर फ्लो ऑफ इनकम की जब हम बात करते हैं ना, तो एक बेसिक कॉन्सेप्ट ये होता है सर्कुलर फ्लो ऑफ इनकम का, कि एक इकोनॉमी है, और एक इकोनॉमी के अंदर देर इज, क्योंकि इकोनॉमिक्स हैज बीन नैरोड डाउन टू जस्ट गुड्स एंड सर्विसेज, बाइंग एंड सेलिंग गुड्स, getting the happiness out of it, right? That's what economics has been narrowed down to. तो जब इकोनॉमिक्स इतनी ज्यादा ब्रीफ हो जाती है, तो यू ऑल यू नीड इज producers and consumers. ठीक है? They come to a market in order to buy goods and services, right? Consumer comes, shows their demand that this is what they're interested in buying, and producer comes with the produce, and demand and supply decides at what price, what quantity should be sold, right? But ये तो सिर्फ two sector है, consumers and producers. We know that in reality, there is not only just two sectors, but in reality, there is more to it. You have um, government, which is also there, and you have uh, foreigners who are also interested in buying your product. ठीक है? तो मैं जो सिंपल सा बनाता हूं, आई मेक दिस वन, जो आपको बनाना भी था वो यही बनाना था बस. Firms, households. Firm represents the producers and households represents the consumers. इनका आपस में क्या रिलेशनशिप है, हाउसहोल्ड्स और फर्म्स का? वेल, एक रिलेशनशिप ये है कि हाउसहोल्ड्स फर्म्स को फैक्टर्स ऑफ प्रोडक्शन देते हैं, बिकॉज रिमेंबर इन अ टू सेक्टर इकोनॉमी वेयर देयर इज नो गवर्नमेंट, every resource, land, labor, capital, enterprise is owned by households, people. Factors of production is provided by the households to the firms, and in return, the firms pay them incomes for it, right? Land के बदले में rent, wages, interest, profits. And there is another relationship. The firms produces goods and services with the factors of production and they sell it to them, and households makes the consumption payments. इसको हम कहते हैं consumption expenditure. Now, in a question where you were required to draw a circular flow of income, this is what you were required to do. ये 3 मार्क मिल गए थे बाय द वे इसके ऊपर, इस सर्कुलर फ्लो ऑफ इनकम के ऊपर, that having a firm household and money going this way and money going that way. Um, but this is only almost like partially a two sector economy. ठीक है? अब होता क्या है? हाउसहोल्ड्स ने फैक्टर्स ऑफ प्रोडक्शन दिए, फर्म्स ने गुड्स एंड सर्विसेज प्रोड्यूस किए, लेट्स से $100 million के. ऑब्वियसली जो फैक्टर्स प्रोड्यूस हुए उसके बदले में गवर्नमेंट ने $100 million की इनकम्स पे की हैं. हाउसहोल्ड्स ने वो 100 million लेके गुड्स एंड सर्विसेज पे स्पेंड करके फर्म्स को 100 million की एक्सपेंडिचर दिखा दी. And now in this economy, money is continuously going around and round and round. Excuse me. The money earned is being spent. Now just imagine पाकिस्तान के अंदर हमारी इकोनॉमी इतनी ट्रांसपेरेंट होती that any amount of money that has been earned gets consumed and goes back to the firm. Firm produces more goods and for the factors of production pays the households, and households again with the income buy those goods and services, and this economy is happy. But some households decide that we should save money for future. इसको हम कहते हैं savings. So what they've decided is let's take 20 million out and save. Now we're talking about the whole population collectively, right? So now the problem that has happened is that the consumers, instead of spending the entire 100 million, they've spent about 80 million. And so now the firms have only gotten 80 million. So future में क्या होगा? The firms will only produce 80 million worth of goods and services, and they will pay the incomes for the factors used as 80 million. But then what will happen again? The incomes that have been earned, people will decide to save another small chunk of that. तो 80 का वो chunk save कर लेते हैं, let's say another 15 they save. So therefore, if they're saving 15 again, so now instead of spending the entire 80 that they earned, they will be spending 65. And so this whole process will keep on happening, and the money will keep on coming out of the system, right? The spending will fall. And if you notice, a circular flow of income mein, the money is shrinking. And when this money is shrinking, your GDP is not going to rise as much it was supposed to be. This money which has been taken out of the system is called withdrawals. And these are pretty natural things that happens in the economy all the time. Okay? But अभी हम सिर्फ फॉर्मल इकोनॉमी की बात कर रहे हैं. Whenever, like इनफॉर्मल के अंदर तो you have, drugs. जब आप ड्रग डीलर से ड्रग्स खरीदते हैं तो ड्रग डीलर के पास जब पैसे जाते हैं तो दैट ड्रग डीलर कैन नॉट पुट दैट मनी इन द बैंक और टेल द गवर्नमेंट दैट आई हैव सोल्ड दिस ड्रग. वेल नाउ यू कैन एटलीस्ट जो फॉर्मल सेक्टर में आ गई हैं इन वेस्टर्न इकोनॉमीज. बट that money, when you buy like drugs from it, that becomes an illegal amount of money, and that leaves the system. Okay? When you keep this money in the bank, that money comes back as investment, because the good thing about banks are they're taking your savings and they're loaning it out to whoever wants it. And that's where injections come into the system. This is an injection. The money that left the circular flow, the 20 million, that comes back into the system and the circular flow gets equilibrium. That's an equilibrium, by the way. The money going out is equals to the money coming back into the system. That means economy is in an equilibrium. लेकिन ये जो equilibrium है ये सिर्फ two sector है up until now. What do I mean by two sector? And how many more sectors are there? So we say that there are two sector, three sector, and four sector. So if we have two, three, and four sector, then where is the the first sector? Well, there is no such thing as a one sector economy, because you need to have consumers and producers to have some sort of trade to happen. तो कम से कम टू सेक्टर इकोनॉमी होना जरूरी है. तो टू सेक्टर इकोनॉमी के अंदर you have firms who does investments and you have households who do consumption. तो वो जो अभी हमने एक्सपेंडिचर मॉडल पढ़ा था ना एई का, which was C plus I plus G plus X minus M. So basically, when we have only C and I, it's a two sector economy. When you introduce a government, it becomes a three sector closed economy. So I've introduced another term over here, closed. Closed means that you are not doing international trade. It's a three sector closed economy. Four sector is always an open economy. उसमें C भी होता है, consumers, I भी होता है, businesses, government spending भी होती है, G, and international trade भी होता है, X minus M. Do you follow? Right now, I have only drawn a two-sector economy where you have firms and households. Firms pay them, they do the consumption. Sometimes money gets out of the system, and then that money can come back into the system. It's a two-sector economy. When I introduce government, now it has become a three-sector closed economy. Now we need to realize something about this government. Governments have budgets where they decide how much tax to collect and how much government spending they want to do. Okay? इधर जब गवर्नमेंट लोगों को टैक्स करती है तो that's a withdrawal from the system because the households don't have the money now. It has been taken away, so they can't spend that money anymore. Okay, so the government has taken this money out of the system. But then government spends on public goods and merit goods and administrative expenses and all, and they do all of that spending and brings that money back into the system. Do you understand? Now it's a three-sector equilibrium. The money which went out as a result of savings and taxes is coming back into the system as investment and government spending. Okay? But then, fourth sector, open economy, may we want to talk about the government, the international trade. Now, international trade ke andar, you have something called trade balance. Trade balance is X minus M. And we've done this in various aspects, balance of payment may, O levels may, and all. Basically, all you're measuring is exports versus imports. Okay? So when you introduce exports and imports into the circular flow of income, this is what we do. Whenever we import goods, the money goes out of the system. Import is a withdrawal. It takes the money out of the system. Okay? But then when we export the goods, that money comes back into the system in the form of export revenue. अब ये हो गया आपका four sector equilibrium where all your injections, by the way, your injections are, what are your injections? Investment, government spending, exports. All three things bring the money into the system. Withdrawals के अंदर you have savings, taxes, imports. They take the money out of the system. If they both are equal, your economy is in a disequilibrium. It's in an equilibrium. My bad. If the money going out is equals to money coming in, economy is stable, equilibrium. However, if the money coming in is more than the money going out, just imagine, इस system के अंदर the money coming in is more, the money going out is less. So what will happen? Your economy will expand because there's new fresh money coming in. Lekin, if a scenario is the money going out is more than the money coming in, your economy will shrink slowly. Now, how serious is this particular thing that we're talking about? The thing is, every economy, every city, every district, any kind of an area where an economy exists should worry about this. Okay, now let me give you an example of one of the examples that I saw very long time ago. This is like more than a decade ago. I saw this on BBC where they were talking about how in an I think it was one of the European town, like very local sort of town where tourists usually come. Sort of like you can say Hamara Murray type ka scene. Okay. And so in that town, everything is localized. You have local restaurants, local coffee shops, local barber shops, local clothing stores, local grocery stores, local bakery. Everything is local. And the thing with these local things are local shops and entrepreneurs is that they're all buying goods and services amongst each other. The coffee is local, the milk is local, the butter is local, the flour is local, everything is produced in that town. Okay? So when a foreigner comes to this town and buy themselves a cup of coffee for, let's say, 4 euros, if the economy is completely local, what will happen that entire 4 euro will come into that society and it will get spread amongst the sellers and the suppliers. And that money will stay in that town and make that town richer. Okay? लेकिन वहां पे फिर क्या हुआ? The art, the whole documentary was about that Costa Coffee wanted to open shop, and they were almost complete and ready. Uh, the locals were obviously protesting from day one, and eventually the locals won. क्यों? क्योंकि they made the case that whenever if Costa Coffee opens and if a tourist or even a local person spends 4 euros on the coffee, the Costa Coffee ka coffee, so out of the £4, only £0.5 will remain in our economy. वो भी किस लिए? Maybe like rent or wage का. Okay? But the 3.5 euro will leave that town and go back to the main headquarter country wherever Costa Coffee mainly operates. Because Costa Coffee अपनी खुद की कॉफी लाएगी from wherever. They're going to bring their own sugar, own milk, own packaging, own, equipment. So everything is going to come from some other town. So every time they're going to drink a cup of coffee, the money is going to leave. अब इसी को मरी के ऊपर भी extend करके देखो. I don't know if you've been to Murray, but last time when I went, I was surprised to see. I went after a very long time. All I could see was the same kachra that I see in Karachi. The same Super Biscuit, the same Red Bull, the same cold drinks, the same KFC, and the same uh, chains. So what we know about it is that every time एक बंदा जो tourism के लिए वहां गया है and they're spending the money, they spend the money and that money comes back to the main cities and that town hardly retains any. ये आपका circular flow का key concept है basically, and it's important. Now ये जो मैंने बनाया है, this is like a very extensive one, लेकिन वो भी मेरी नजर के अंदर this is an extensive one where we're talking about how this is working. Um, अब डिफरेंट क्वेश्चन के अंदर डिफरेंट एक्सटेंट को डिस्कस करने की जरूरत है, ठीक है? द वन दैट वी डिड, जो जून में आया था, शो यू इन अ बिट. दिस इज द सर्कुलर फ्लो ऑफ इनकम. लेट मी एक्सप्लेन कि बुक्स में इसको किस तरह से शो किया है. ये एक सिंप्लीफाइड सर्कुलर फ्लो ऑफ इनकम मॉडल है. इसमें क्या हो रहा है? The 390 billion worth of Pakistani goods and services that has been produced is being bought by somebody, and the firms have to pay to the factor of production ke owner the income, and with that income, people show their expenditure and the economy is in a harmony. ये बहुत ही simplified है. Output produced with the factors of production, income is paid, income से expenditure is done on the goods and services. Okay? I don't think you need to make this one. फिर इसका थोड़ा सा कॉम्प्लेक्स वर्जन इन्होंने कैसे बनाया है? जस्ट टेक अ लुक एट इट. जो मैंने अभी एक्सप्लेन किया था ये वो ही है बेसिकली. You have households, consumers, you have firms. Firms produces goods and services and sells it to the firm. sells it to the household. Goods moves in this direction, and households makes the payment for these goods and services as consumption expenditure जो मैंने लिखाया था. ओके. दूसरा रिलेशन क्या है? हाउसहोल्ड्स गिव फर्म्स फैक्टर्स ऑफ प्रोडक्शन, और उस फैक्टर्स ऑफ प्रोडक्शन के बदले में फर्म्स मेक्स द इनकम पेमेंट्स. अब आप इसको इनकम्स भी लिख सकते हो और फैक्टर पेमेंट्स भी लिख सकते हो. वी आर विलिंग टू गिव यू. जो जून में हमारे उसमें आया था ना क्वेश्चन, उसके अंदर यू वर गिवन 1 मार्क फॉर शोइंग के हाउस होल्ड और फर्म्स एग्जिस्ट करती हैं, 1 मार्क. देन एक्सपेंडिचर 1 मार्क, और इनकम्स इस डायरेक्शन में जाती हैं 1 मार्क. दिस इज हाउ द 3 मार्क्स वर गिवन. देयर वाज नो मार्क फॉर दिस फैक्टर की मूवमेंट एंड गुड्स की मूवमेंट. इनफैक्ट जो मैंने डायग्राम बनाया है ना, ये वाला पोर्शन, जस्ट द center portion, you get 3 marks for it. Okay, at least you got 3 marks for it based on the question's requirement. Now, this is also very simplified because इसमें तो ना कोई injection है ना कोई withdrawal है. So now this is the more complex one, and I couldn't believe that kids actually made these. वही बात हो रही है. Households, firms. Households makes the expenditure, यानी consumption, and firms makes incomes की payment. उसके बाद from these payments they are talking about how export, which is an injection, government spending, which is an injection, is part of that, और government spending के बदले में taxes, which is going out, and savings, which is coming out of the factor payments. कंजम्पशन के अंदर इंपोर्ट्स और आई डोंट सी, या एक्सपोर्ट्स उधर गई हैं, बिकॉज इंपोर्ट से पैसा बाहर जाता है. डायरेक्ट इनडायरेक्ट टैक्सेस और इन्वेस्टमेंट्स, देव डन ऑल ऑफ दिस, ऑल सॉर्ट्स ऑफ मूवमेंट. इससे भी कॉम्प्लेक्स बन सकता है. आई डोंट थिंक यू रिक्वायर्ड टू डू दैट. सो फार इन द लास्ट 3 you were not required to do that. Maximum what you want to do is this and nothing more. ठीक है. अगर इंजेक्शंस और विड्रॉल्स को भी फैक्टर इन करना है तो यू डोंट नीड टू डू एनीथिंग मोर देन दैट. लेट मी रेज अ फ्यू थिंग्स जो इसके अंदर थोड़ा सा क्लटर बना रहा है. लेट्स रिमूव दैट. ओके. Let's remove this. Let's remove this. Yeah, that's it. This is, I think, maximum. डिपेंडिंग ऑन द क्वेश्चन, कि अगर क्वेश्चन में उन्होंने बोल दिया फॉर अ 4 सेक्टर इकोनॉमी बना के दिखाओ, राइट? सो ये आपका 4 सेक्टर इकोनॉमी है विद द इंजेक्शंस एंड द विड्रॉल्स एंड एवरीथिंग इन इट. ओके. बट ऑब्वियसली क्वेश्चंस कैन बी अ लॉट मोर कॉम्प्लिकेटेड. ये तो मैं तुमको एक सिर्फ एक ओवरव्यू दे रहा हूं ऑफ द सर्कुलर फ्लो ऑफ इनकम. I have mentioned injections, I have mentioned withdrawals, but अगर एक क्वेश्चन के साथ अगर हम डील करें ऑफ व्हाट वी लर्नड सो फार, बाय द वे इस टॉपिक के अंदर और भी मजीद एक्सटेंशन हुई है, जिसके अंदर इस टॉपिक के अंदर सर्कुलर फ्लो का फिर फर्दर डिस्कशन गया था. एंड दे इवन मेड इवन मोर कॉम्प्लेक्स मॉडल्स ऑफ इक्विलिब्रियम्स एंड ऑल. लेट मी सी इफ आई कैन सी दैट. वो A2 में हम पढ़ाते थे, बड़ी अच्छे से एक्सटेंसिवली हम पढ़ाते थे, लेकिन आई डोंट नो व्हाई दे डिसाइडेड के दोस पर्टिकुलर डायग्राम्स नीड्स टू बी डिस्कस्ड इन here also. So let me just show it for a second what I'm talking about. me just find it. Yeah, okay. There was this part right here. So do let me know if you guys have done this. But equilibrium disequilibrium के अंदर, this is one of the diagrams that they have talked about. This wasn't required to be made, honestly. In fact, all three questions, one thing in common is that they did not want these diagrams in it. This is not a circular flow of income. Okay? The one that we did previously is the circular flow of income. लेकिन वो सर्कुलर फ्लो ऑफ इनकम के अंदर जो विड्रॉल्स और इंजेक्शंस थे, बेसिकली उनकी एक ही रिप्रेजेंटेशन होती है, विच कैन बी डन थ्रू दिस डायग्राम. इट्स नॉट समथिंग कि मैं इस तरीके से समझा सकता हूँ. इट्स अ मच मोर डिटेल्ड एक्सप्लेनेशन एंड आई हैव डन इट इन माय लेक्चर्स. मैं क्वेश्चन के पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू से तुमको बता देता हूँ कि क्या आपने आंसर कैसे करना होता है इनको. So let me take you to one of the questions which um, came in Hamara variant, 24 variant 22, and let me tell you कि किस तरीके से we were supposed to answer for it. Right. Okay. So the question that came was June 22 के अंदर, June 24 paper 22. So the question is, yeah, this one. इसकी तो मैंने भी checking की थी, तो I have it clearly in my mind how the checking was done for this one. They're saying, with the help of a diagram, explain what is meant by the circular flow of income in an open economy and consider the extent to which it can explain economic growth in such an economy. Ab, they're saying with the help of a diagram you have to do it, right? So obviously इसका जो आप diagram बनाएंगे, उसके अंदर the way I was just talking about the diagram, you make a household, you make क्या कहते हैं firm, and I remember talking to a lot of teachers, Nixer also, and for a question like this, जब हम when we were planning to give it, once back in the day for a test week or something, तो उसके अंदर they were surprised when I told them कि भाई आप क्या सोच रहे हैं, इतना सेविंग्स और इन्वेस्टमेंट्स और इतने डायग्राम बनाने की जरूरत नहीं थी. All you had to do for 3 mark, you could get 3 mark for household say consumption expenditure moves in this direction from households to firms. The word expenditure was important, and firms say income moves in this direction. They gave 3 mark for this basically. Okay? कि किस तरीके से expenditure is flowing in this way, incomes is flowing in this way, and this is how the firm and the households are there. That's it. Honestly, I would not recommend you to make just this. I would suggest, क्योंकि इसमें लिखा है what is meant by circular flow of income, I think you should give a small brief definition of circular flow of income, which is that circular flow of income explains the movement of money in the economy between the firm and the household. ठीक है, ये आपकी डेफिनेशन हो गई. फिर आपने डायग्राम बनाया. क्योंकि यहाँ ओपन इकोनॉमी लिखा हुआ है, तो देन टू सेक्टर ओपन कभी भी नहीं हो सकती है. ओके, सी एंड आई हैज टू बी देयर. ओके, तो 3 सेक्टर ओपन हो सकती है, बिल्कुल हो सकती है, बट देन देयर कांट बी गवर्नमेंट इन इट. ओके, दे कांट बी अ गवर्नमेंट इन इट. अगर ये थ्री सेक्टर है। फोर्थ सेक्टर ओपन हो सकती है विद गवर्नमेंट। ठीक है, तो सर्कुलर फ्लो ऑफ इनकम basically looks at how the money flows between the firms and the households. You can go into Bamford and you can see the definition, although इस question में definition का mark भी नहीं था. So, my recommendation is always do the injections and the withdrawals. Okay? So, do mark the withdrawals in the diagram and show कि देखें जी savings एक withdrawal है, taxes एक withdrawal है, and imports एक withdrawal है. ओके, और फिर इंजेक्शंस के अंदर इन्वेस्टमेंट एक इंजेक्शन है, गवर्नमेंट स्पेंडिंग एक इंजेक्शन है, और एक्सपोर्ट्स। बाय द वे, जब मैं लिखता भी हूं तो रिमेंबर टू सेक्टर में सेविंग्स टर्न्स इनटू इन्वेस्टमेंट, टैक्सेस फंड्स द गवर्नमेंट स्पेंडिंग, इंपोर्ट्स के ऑपोजिट यू हैव एक्सपोर्ट्स, राइट? इन माय ओपिनियन दिस इज हाउ मच यू शुड ऑलवेज ऑलवेज मेक। ठीक है, दिस वुड बी द आइडियल इन माय ओपिनियन, कि आप इतना तो बनाना चाहिए ही चाहिए आपको। ठीक है, अब अगर आप क्वेश्चन पे फोकस करें एंड कंसिडर द एक्सटेंट टू विच इट कैन एक्सप्लेन इकोनॉमिक ग्रोथ इन द इकोनॉमी। अब जब हम इकोनॉमिक ग्रोथ की बात करते हैं तो वी आर ऑब्वियसली टॉकिंग अबाउट मोर आउटपुट बीइंग प्रोड्यूस्ड। So, what we want to suggest about economic growth and the discussion is, मेरे ख्याल में सर्कुलर फ्लो के सब क्वेश्चंस के अंदर आपको इंजेक्शन को डिफाइन करना चाहिए, विथड्रॉल को डिफाइन करना चाहिए. Injection is an inflow of money into the circular flow of income. Withdrawal is an outflow of money from the circular flow of income. I think इसमें और कोई मसला नहीं होना चाहिए. अब डिस्कशन ये है, क्योंकि उसने ओपन इकोनॉमी बोला है तो दैट मींस एक्सपोर्ट और इंपोर्ट का डिस्कशन बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट हो जाता है. यू मस्ट, जब आप इंजेक्शंस बताएंगे ना, तो इंजेक्शंस के अंदर माय रिकमेंडेशन टू यू इज डोंट होल्ड बैक ऑन एनीथिंग. डू टॉक अबाउट इन्वेस्टमेंट, डू टॉक अबाउट गवर्नमेंट स्पेंडिंग, बट यू मस्ट टॉक अबाउट एक्सपोर्ट, क्योंकि ओपन इकोनॉमी एक्सपोर्ट और इंपोर्ट की वजह से ही होती है. एंड विड्रॉल के अंदर यू मस्ट टॉक एंड एक्सप्लेन सेविंग्स होती हैं, टैक्सेस होते हैं, और सबसे ज्यादा इंपॉर्टेंट इंपोर्ट्स होते हैं. फ्रॉम व्हाट आई रिमेंबर, marking scheme mein they said a student, it is must that the student mention export and import, but not only that, they should also mention one, at least one more of the other injection and withdrawal. So be safe, write them all. ठीक है, जैसा भी क्वेश्चन हो, ओपन हो, अगर क्लोज हो तो एक्सपोर्ट और इंपोर्ट को आप हटा सकते हो, वो उसकी टेंशन नहीं है, वो आप हटा सकते हो, बिल्कुल हटा सकते हो. ठीक है, बट ऑब्वियसली देर इज नो मार्क कटिंग मार्क्स फॉर राइटिंग समथिंग विच इज नॉट रिक्वायर्ड, but there is a cutting of marks that something is required but you don't write. Okay, so you're always on the safe if you overdo something. अब क्योंकि क्वेश्चन इज अबाउट के ग्रोथ के ऊपर इम्पैक्ट, ओके, हाउ द सर्कुलर फ्लो ऑफ इनकम इन एन ओपन इकोनॉमी कैन explain us about the economic growth. So this is how it can explain us. This is what you'll do. If injection is greater than the withdrawal, okay? If the inflow is greater than the outflow, then economic growth will rise. If the injection is less and withdrawal is more, So that means inflows are less and outflows are more, then your economic growth is going to fall. You understand? तो इस तरीके से हम बात कर सकते हैं. This would be considered your 3 mark का explanation. I think the way they'll give you mark is your explanation. I remember जो हमने किया था, हमने देखा था एक्सपोर्ट के साथ एक और कोई इंजेक्शन लिखा हुआ है कि नहीं लिखा हुआ, और इंपोर्ट्स के साथ कोई और लिखा है कि नहीं लिखा हुआ. So we gave 1 mark for that and 1 mark for this and 1 mark for this. ठीक है, तो ये 3 mark आपके एनालिसिस में हमने दिए थे कि this is how the growth will be. And then final evaluation was about how big of an impact can it actually bring. तो evaluation के अंदर we were looking for a discussion on the size of injections and withdrawals. आई थिंक हमारे उसमें तो फिर भी आसान आया था. जो नवंबर में आया था दैट वाज मच नाइसर क्वेश्चन, मच मोर कॉम्प्लिकेटेड, विच आई डील इन माय सेकंड लेक्चर. But you evaluation के अंदर you can simply talk about the size of the injections and withdrawals, and that's how they will have an impact. The greater the size of injection in comparison to the withdrawal, the greater the impact it's going to bring to the national income. तो ये डिस्कशन था हमारा इसके अंदर. तो this is how the answer was written for this, right? Please make an attempt on this particular essay. This is the year. It's from June 24, variant 22, and then we'll talk about more in the next lecture. We'll probably complete because there are not many questions on this particular topic.